Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate all of you joining us here virtually for the Zero Emission Ad Hoc Committee's roundtable. We are very grateful to have both our internal senior leadership as well as senior leadership from transit agencies, public agencies, and those who service them across the country with us today to talk about an incredibly important issue, which is zero emissions and the transition to zero emissions. My name is Bobby Deschelle. I'm the director on the RTD board and have the honor of chairing this committee. I want to acknowledge that today is in fact election day. If you have not had the opportunity to do so, please go vote before the polls close, whether you are here in Colorado or elsewhere. And a gentle reminder that RTD services are zero fare today on election day. I want to start off by quickly taking a step back, talking about why we're here. RTD's board of directors convened an ad hoc committee to evaluate establishing a zero emission policy. Starting off with just our when it was convened, starting off with our zero emission buses. But as we continue to do research, evaluate other agency plans, and look at best practices in the broader community, the reality is characterizing it as just transitioning buses would be grossly understating the task at hand. It also leaves out the opportunity to electrify other assets that RTD owns and operates, or operates as the case may be, such as some of our smaller service vehicles, cutaway vehicles, and other vehicles that may be ready for electrification earlier than just the buses. Transitioning to zero emission is as I'm sure we'll hear today, is really a full-blown facilities and asset management and operations transition. So we're very excited to be discussing this with all of you and to be really focusing on transitioning to zero emissions as measured by Scope 1 and Scope 2, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. For those joining virtually, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is viewed as the sort of standard for carbon accounting, for accounting for emissions. And if there's others that our panelists are using, we'd love to hear about that as well. Our hope and goal here today is that this is really more of a discussion, that you all interact with one another, that we all are able to have a robust conversation versus folks sort of standing and delivering. We're hopeful that we'll be able to, sort of after the first basics of who's in the room and what are you doing and why are you qualified to be here, that we are able to really dive into a more robust discussion about positioning our agency from a policy standpoint, so that our management team can have a good implementation standpoint. We've received some questions about public comment. We will not be taking public comment today. However, any and all directors are available. Their emails and phone numbers are available on the website. You are also able to provide public comment on what will end up being a recommended action related to zero emission policies at the executive committee meeting, which meets on November 10th, 2022 at 12 p.m. Or at the board meeting, should it pass out of committee, which meets on November 15th, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. Before we get started, I wanted to go ahead and give our general manager and CEO, Ms. Johnson, or any of our internal RTD staff the opportunity to kick off our introductions. So if you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves and your team, by all means.
So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to all the ad hoc committee members and to all that are assembled. I'm Deborah Johnson. I am the general manager and CEO and appreciate the opportunity to bring remarks. Before I delve into that, I do have Michael Ford, who is here this afternoon. He serves as our Chief Operations Officer. Additionally, we have Fred Worthen, who currently is not on camera, but if you could come on camera, Fred, and show your handsome face. He is our Assistant General Manager of bus operations. And then we have Mr. Henry Stoppelkamp, who serves as our Assistant General Manager of Capital Programs. So recognizing the conversation that will ensue today, I want to be very transparent and upfront that we as an agency are committed to zero emissions, recognizing that members of my team and I have worked at different agencies throughout the country and recognize where we are currently in this space. There's no certain standards and things of the like, but as we look at where we're trying to go at the Regional Transportation District and the yeoman's job that the board is doing in reference to establishing a policy, we embrace that. from a practicality standpoint, we have to be cognizant of how we do things at the agency and what might we do from an operational vantage point to ensure that we can adapt and move forward in a way for the betterment of the region and the agency as a whole. So with that, I will yield the floor to any member of my team that would like to make some brief comments, because I do understand that we have quite a bit of an agenda before us and we want to hear from our SMEs that have been assembled. So Mr. Ford, Mr. Worthen, or Mr. Stoppelkamp, if you have anything to add, I will yield the floor. Thank you very kindly, Mr. Chairman.
This is Michael Ford, CO. I just look forward to the discussion and the opportunities to explore ways that we can look at alternative fuels and other mobility options for the future. Thank you.
It's Fred Worthen, ATM of Bus Operations. I have been working on fleet electrification for the agency for almost 5 years now. And I know what a tremendous amount of effort it takes to move forward with such a project. I look forward to hearing from everyone. Thank you.
And I guess I better pipe up. I echo the comments from Mr. Ford and Mr. Worthen, and look forward to hearing what's out there and what are the possibilities. And in my role, it's basically how do we implement the infrastructure to support whatever technology we end up with. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you. And if there's any members of the committee who want to introduce themselves, I also note Director Busick and Director Cook. Directors Busick and Cook have also joined us.
I'll go. Hi, I think I know almost everybody here. I'm Kate Williams. I'm the Director of District A and a big fan of moving us to being climate conscious and sustainable.
And I'm Lynn Geisinger. I'm the board vice chair and represent Boulder area, West Boulder County, Boulder, Louisville, Longmont, areas like that. And yeah, I think this is what we need to be doing to meet the region's goals and to meet our climate emergency. So thanks.
Julian Bouquet, RTD Director for District G, which is the Southeast, Douglas County and parts of Arapahoe County. Great to meet you all virtually. Really excited. As you can tell, there's a lot of enthusiasm from the board's perspective of ultimately getting to cleaner options, and we're here to listen, and we're excited for today.
And I'm Vince Busick. I'm the board chair. I'm director for District J, North I-25 corridor, US 36 corridor. So we've got some major corridors cutting through my district, and eager to hear the conversation and hopeful that RTD becomes the green option. Thanks.
All right. So this first question is going to be really, unfortunately, not a discussion because it's really about you all and what you do and what you've done. So after that, though, would again love robust discussion playing off one another. As you introduce yourself, if you could also let us know what you or your agency is doing or what you've done in electrification and transition to net zero that you feel would be relevant for RTD. So again, introducing yourself, your organization, as well as what you or your agency are doing or have done in electrification and transition to net zero that you feel would be relevant for RTD. Why don't we go ahead and get started with Maria.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me here today. Nice to meet you all. I think I've met Kate before. So nice to see you again, Kate. So my name is Maria DiBiase-Eisman. I'm a policy advisor at the Colorado Energy Office. I'm currently working on the Colorado Electric Vehicle Plan, which will be released in early 2023. And I also most recently ran our hydrogen roadmap. And my primary work recently is working on the Western Interstate Hydrogen Hub. I've been very involved in that 4-state effort. We just submitted our concept paper for that. So Our agency has done quite a bit around transportation electrification. One of the agencies we work very closely with is CDOT. And so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on everything that the state does. I would reference one of my colleagues, Michael King, as a good reference as well in some of these areas. But I'm going to run through, we've got a lot going on with electrification. I'm going to run through some of the key ones. Mentioning the Colorado EV plan, the plan that there was a 2018 plan and a 2020 plan. The 2023 plan is going to contain everything the state is doing around transportation electrification. And we'll have some additional goals, but we are standing up so many new projects at the state right now. It's going to be kind of a compendium of everything that's going on in the state to serve as a resource for everybody working or with an interest in the electrification of the transportation sector. We recently, last October, released a low carbon hydrogen roadmap. That roadmap does contain information on medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification. It doesn't speak directly to transit, but it does have some discussion and data on the medium and heavy duty sector. And we do have one great chart in there that shows that in the relatively short term, one of the, the transit sector does provide a good opportunity for hydrogen. It's and hydrogen for the medium and heavy duty sector, our low carbon hydrogen roadmap showed that that actually hydrogen vehicles might outperform electric vehicles in the medium and heavy duty sector, and that is because they don't require battery electric vehicles in the heavier duty categories have a lot of onboard batteries. Those onboard batteries are heavy and they take up space. And where cargo, and that could be, I guess, people, are at a premium, then that could make the cost, the cost basis for a green hydrogen powered vehicle. That's in our low carbon hydrogen roadmap. And I mentioned the Western Interstate Hydrogen Hub. The states of Wyoming, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah have signed an MOU to go after exclusively one of the hubs funded through the IIJA that the federal government put out. We did work together and submitted our concept paper just in the past couple of days. And we do have, it's only a concept paper at this phase, but part of our concept would be medium and heavy duty vehicle, hydrogen vehicles. I'm so used to saying electrification. We also have the CEVC, we have what's called the Colorado Electric Vehicle Coalition. That is an organization that helps you keep up to date on everything the state and what's going on in Colorado around vehicle electrification. It has a transit subgroup. That subgroup is scoping an analysis on the feasibility of transitioning Mustang services to ZEVs in the future. You are all welcome to join that subgroup. You can contact me and I can add you to that. There was as part of the goal in our last electric vehicle plan, we called for a transit zero emission vehicle roadmap. And that identified strategies, policies, and funding levels necessary to achieve the state goal of 1,000 transit ZEVs on the road by 2030 and 100% ZEV transit fleet by 2050. So that transit zero emission vehicle roadmap has been completed. It was released in February of 22. We also have it was a strong foundation for the development of the new clean transit enterprise, which was finalized in May of 2022, and it will guide the investment of an estimated $13.4 million in zero emission transit projects over the coming decade. We also have a program out of our office called Charge Ahead Colorado. It funds charging stations, community charging stations, and fast charging stations, the DCFC. And then the Colorado Energy Office is currently developing a medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle infrastructure program to address the needs of this market segment. This competitive offering will be structured similar to the Charge Ahead program but will be specific to medium and heavy duty vehicles. It will have a focus on both depot and public charging, and it will offer funding based on technology and project scale. It will be strategically designed to incentivize and enable a structure and efficient transition to zero, medium, and heavy duty vehicles. And I'll stop at that.
Awesome. Thanks, Bria. It sounds like there's a lot of great opportunities, especially as we represent the largest transit agency in Colorado. So sounds like there's a lot of great opportunities for collaboration and partnership in the future. Yeah, and the Western Interstate Hydrogen Hub would be very interested in talking to RTD if they had any interest in being part of the hub. Wonderful. We'll definitely follow up with that. And thank you again. As folks try to be mindful of time, I know there's lots, everyone has lots going on. Bart, why don't you let us know what's going on in New York?
Yes, good afternoon, Bart Coppola. So I handle the zero emissions implementation in New York. Currently, we have 15 all-electric buses running around in the Manhattan duty cycle, articulated buses. We currently have a procurement of 60 buses with New Flyer, and we're looking by the end of the year to get another procurement of 470 buses, a mixture of articulated and 40-foot standards. We also have a grant with New York State. We're looking to be a successful grantee for a small hydrogen project up at one of the Bronx facilities. And in that case, the grant would be for 2 buses. We can probably fill 8 to 10 hydrogen buses in the event. So hopefully by the end of the year, we'll find out if that's successful. One of our challenges has been, we're trying to, with our next 60 bus delivery, we're trying to separate the buses into all 5 boroughs. New York, most people think it's New York City, but actually there's the 5 boroughs: Queens, Staten Island, the Bronx, and Brooklyn. So we're gonna move the buses to all 5 jurisdictions and concentrate specifically in some of the EJ communities, environmental justice communities. And this way we'll also see how they operate in a multitude of duty cycles. Currently Manhattan's a low speed, Staten Island's a higher speed, but when I mean higher speed, 7 to 10, Manhattan's in a 3 to 5. So it's not express, let me put it that way. We're also, at the state level, they're looking to create a hydrogen hub up north in the Rochester area. Our governor's been pushing for that. So part of us moving in that direction is to take advantage of that hydrogen. I echo the previous commentator that, in the heavy duty field, hydrogen, may have a space for us. We're gonna gently dip our toe in to see how things progress. We're working with our partners, the New York Power Authority, which supplies power to many of our localities. They're going to do some of our construction work specifically for the next, we're currently on 4 locations, and we're looking to partner with them for the next 12 locations. The New York Power Authority has been mandated to provide charging on our interstates. So we're trying to leverage their ability to meet the ABBs, the Siemens of the world, to get them, since they have a much more, a better relationship with those with us. So we're going to progress along those lines. So thank you. Any questions, just let me know.
Thank you. Dr. Kotz. I guess Andrew, because I called everyone else by their first name.
Sure. Yeah. Awesome. Feel free to. Yeah. Feel free to call me Andrew. My name is Andrew Kotz. I'm a senior research engineer at the National Renewable Energy Lab. We're located out in Golden, and NREL is a fairly large entity in that they do a lot of different research, but our Center for Integrated Mobility Science really focuses on trying to understand how we improve the energy efficiency of the mobility system. And that includes both transit, all types of heavy duty vehicles and light duty vehicles, and last mile. My specific area is in heavy duty energy efficiency and electrification. And so we work all over the country and around the world to help the communities understand what it takes to electrify and to help improve the energy efficiency. So whether that's hydrogen, going to low carbon fuels, or electrification, we try and understand what makes sense for different scenarios. And what our process is we'll work with different fleets to collect data, typically second by second data on their vehicles, and then develop vehicle models to understand, what battery size and what charging is needed for this vehicle or operation to really make sure that, when you're operating these technologies, which, may not exist yet, that they'll work. And so if, we work with the manufacturers, OEMs, different universities to help bring together the sort of research capabilities to understand these problems. But the biggest thing that I see is working with the fleets, because a lot of times we see these pilot programs in California in environments where it's sunny and the climate's very not necessarily mild, but designed to be optimal for electric vehicles. And so understanding, especially the challenges in Colorado with the road grade and the cold weather, understanding the impact that has on zero emission vehicles is going to be key. And then identifying what vehicles are first movers. So I think that's, our area specifically, we work with buses. Drayage trucks has been another key focus. We have a study in the Port of New York and New Jersey. We had a transit bus study in Duluth, Minnesota, where, it was very, very cold, and they actually had to install diesel fire heaters on their buses because they were on their electric buses because they were not sufficient to heat the cabin. So a lot of different research areas, but we try and publish that information to help other folks make actionable insights. And we actually have a web page called Fleet DNA, which helps disseminate some of that information. So happy to discuss further if there's any follow-up questions on that as well.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. And Chris.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Southwick. I'm the Mobility Innovation Coordinator for the town of Vail. And so we're a rural agency, but a relatively large rural agency. We provide kind of fixed route service in town of Vail proper. About 2.8 million unlinked passenger trips kind of pre-pandemic. And we're very much in that kind of middle of the transitioning our bus fleet from diesel vehicles to battery electric. We have 4 battery electric buses that we received in kind of spring and summer 2021. So we've had about a year. We have 6 more on order we have a scheduled potential delivery in kind of 2023. And we're kind of on pace to be 100% battery electric by 2032 is kind of our goal. We've made we've made electrical upgrades to our bus barn to kind of facilitate both our kind of current charging needs, but also our future charging needs. So upgraded the electrical kind of supply, added a backup diesel generator, added a transformer, and then kind of all the conduits in our bus barn. So as we kind of add additional buses and additional charging infrastructure, hopefully that will make kind of things more less costly. And so, yeah, so we're kind of right in that, starting that process of transitioning our fleet.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Bill.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Via Mobility Services, some of you know pretty well, I think, but just a little background. We started as a paratransit operator in Boulder County. We now operate paratransit services throughout the 8-county metro region, as well as operating some services for RTD, Access-a-Ride and FlexRide. And we operate transit service for the city of Boulder's HOP route. That fleet for the HOP buses is 17 transit buses. We had begun electrifying with kind of a science project in 2017, where we took one of our oldest Gillig 2004 and had it converted to all electric. And it was quite a learning curve for us. We had a good bit of help from Lightning E-Motors and Loveland to do that conversion. And it was a good bus for some time. It, being the science project it was, we had different experiences with the batteries, and Lightning really worked with us to keep that bus out there on the road. Fortunately, we obtained grants to get our first 3 electric buses and took delivery in the winter of 2020. 2021. 3 Proterra buses. We have funding for an additional 6. So that would get our fleet more than halfway electrified for the hop. Both City of Boulder and VIA have, I think, relatively aggressive goals around the electrification. That fleet, we'd like to see that hop fleet fully, I would just call it zero emission. Whether it's all electric, I don't know, but zero emission by 2030. In addition to that fleet, however, we have about 120 other miscellaneous, largely cutaways, some vans, Ford Transits, and even some cars to operate our paratransit services. And we have again, I think a fairly aggressive goal there to electrify that fleet by 2035. Now, to date, we have no electric cutaways. We do have grants for 3, and we have applied for additional. So I expect us in the next year or so to have that fleet going. We have 5 charger stations between 50 and 125 kilowatts. Again, built for the transit fleet, but as we're looking into cutaways, we would be able to use at least the lower end of that, the 50 and 60 kilowatt chargers to charge those vehicles. This all takes place at our Boulder facility currently. Within our goals is to start putting chargers into a Denver facility over the next couple of years and begin to electrify that fleet. That would also give us some capabilities for some of the contracts that we also run to, as those vehicles electrify, operate others. So all, really looking to get zero emission. In addition to zero emission vehicles, however, we really want to look at where our electricity is coming from. Currently, the Boulder facility has about 100 kilowatts of solar power, offsets about 20% of our energy usage for building and charging. We obtained a grant in 2019 from Department of Transportation, CDOT, to do a planning grant around building a microgrid at the Boulder facility. And the project that came out of that was a 3-phase microgrid project that each phase would add about 500 kilowatts of solar and 500 kilowatts of battery storage to this facility, thereby offsetting a large amount of the grid power that we would most likely be using at night while we're charging. So, generating that sunshine electricity all day, putting it back to the grid, some to our batteries, and then being able to pull back off the grid at night. So that's kind of the thought. Could we, I think a very, very aggressive goal would be to make the entire agency zero emission through, for everything we do. Don't know if we could achieve that with that microgrid, but it gets us closer to that. And so that's kind of where we're looking in the future. And I know there's more questions about funding and other things. So I'll stop there.
Great, Bill, thank you so much. And yes, I do want to just make sure we're all speaking the same language. The policy the board is considering is both scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Scope 1 emissions being those emissions that the agency directly emits through its vehicles, and otherwise in scope 2 emissions being power that is procured to power the agency, whether that's in our buildings like on Blake Street or which are primarily office buildings, or whether that's at our depots or where our buses are being charged. I'm not going to run through folks in order, so please feel free to just come on mute, pop in, agree with each other, disagree, talk about your learning. So what issues would you recommend that we as RTD address immediately?
I think, in my experience working with fleets, I think the biggest thing is understanding the scale of charging. Heavy duty vehicles are very power intensive. When you're charging an electric bus, that's, can be the equivalent of charging 8 Nissan Leafs, and some of these even higher scales of charging that are looking at being released are, in the 1 to 3 megawatt per vehicle range. I know NREL is trying to understand some of that, and we're actually putting in a new facility up near Boulder to do 20 megawatt charging research. But that's going to be one of the key areas. So understanding long-term needs of what the transformers are, what that would look like. There's a lot of sort of tools that are available to reduce the power requirements, but that sort of peak power is one of the long-term things that I think should be addressed first, especially when okay, this is how many buses I have, this is how many light duty support vehicles I have. You can get an estimate of what the scale of that might look like. And then the typical pathways are finding some of the first vehicles to test, which you have already been doing, but then understanding where you go from there and what funding opportunities. And I know that's a very general, broad term, but I know that you've all been looking at that, but that's sort of what I've found in working with a bunch of different fleets.
Yeah, and I would build off of what Andrew was saying. I think it's super important to work with your utility. So for us, like Holy Cross is our local energy provider. So it's a rural co-op, and they've been really helpful, both in terms of the infrastructure, but also even kind of the programming and the rate structure we have. So we have a time of use rate for our buses. And so we can save significantly by charging outside of Holy Cross's peak period. So we do all of our charging outside of the 4 to 9 p.m. kind of peak period that Holy Cross has. And that saves us quite a bit every month on our energy costs. And then even, Holy Cross has another program called the Pure program that we partner with that guarantees that the energy that we use comes from renewable sources. So Holy Cross is generally relatively clean grid. I think over 50% of their energy right now is currently coming from renewable sources, and they have a goal of being 100% renewable by 2030. But by participating in the Pure program, we can kind of get to that goal even quicker. And then also, looking at your kind of vehicle blocks and understanding kind of what the different use cases are throughout your system are going to be really important. You might have quite a bit of low-hanging fruit. I know we have, especially in our winter, we have a lot of split shifts. And so buses, they might be out for 8 or 10 hours a day, but they come back in the middle of the day for 3 or 4 hours. So we can charge during the midday, and that really extends their range. And depending on how you kind of structure your system, whether you do on-route charging or whether you do all depot charging, like we're kind of set up to do all depot charging, which makes sense, I think, for our circumstance, because our bus barn is really close to our kind of downtown Dale, where all the layovers occur and where all of our bus swapping occurs. And so it's cheaper for us to do depot charging. But if we need to, potentially swap a bus out, it's important to kind of look at the vehicle blocks and understand kind of what that, what are going to be the different needs for different parts of the system.
I have to agree with Andrew as well, and Chris about the charging. It doesn't take long for your building to run out of power, and then you got to add more transformers or more electricity, and RTD has been an early adopter and a leader in electric vehicles in the state, and I know has had challenges of its own with the electricity. Something we'd like to see, we do not have yet, and it is available, but I don't know how advanced it is software management of the energy and how it's doled out to the buses over the period of time you have and the amount of power you need to get into the buses over that period of time. And I think there's probably some improvement in the technology to come, but to me, that sounds like being able to utilize as much as you can and try to keep that load from spiking and getting demand charges put upon you is got to be key going forward. With our small fleet, it's not even that we're seeing demand charges that we don't like, but as we get more and more electric vehicles, I really don't know how we're going to do it with the power we have and even the power we can get here. So that's a key one. Another item is workforce development. Early on now, we're just having a hard time finding a way to get our folks trained, especially on our maintenance side. And the bus manufacturers are helpful, and they do provide service techs for us. But in the end, we're going to need to be able to manage these buses, and it's likely we're going to have, as we do with internal combustion, we'll have a variety of different types of vehicles and different manufacturers of vehicles, and having a workforce that understands how to work on those vehicles and put the parts in and there's even more physics and engineering involved in that side of it than there is in kind of traditional technology. So that's a big challenge for us, I know.
I would agree with everything everyone has said. I would add that in your planning, your transition plan, which guides your target setting, that you also look at the available funding opportunities and their timelines, and include that in your utility planning and your timeline planning, and reach out to the funding sources, check in with them if it's something you'd really like to incorporate into your planning to make sure you understand how much funding is there and if there's any limitations or timelines you need to consider.
So I heard everyone's answer really centered around a battery electric fleet. Does anyone's answer change if we're talking hydrogen or mixed fuel, BEV and fuel cell EV? Does your sort of biggest item change?
Yeah, I mean, so recently we have a study with Toyota and Kenworth looking at hydrogen fuel cell tractors pulling containers out of the port of LA, and the operators really like it. They operate like a battery electric. They fill in 20 minutes. They have 250-mile range, but there's been a lot of challenges with the fueling infrastructure and making sure that's reliable and consistent. And so I know it seems it can sometimes seem like it's just put it there and play, kind of like a conventional diesel fueling station, but I think there's still a lot of barriers that we need to look at. And it's one of those things is, okay, our battery electric vehicle is going to be surpassing the hydrogen fuel vehicles in terms of range in that time span that the infrastructure might be there. So understanding what the roadmap is for the infrastructure that you're going to be putting in place, because both are going to be a large investment. And so it might be that, okay, if this is about the same time frame as we see battery electrics that are feasible coming on the market, maybe we opt to try and go that route. But there's still some scenarios where it's going to be very challenging for a battery electric to obtain be feasible in the near future.
One of the challenges we're facing in New York, and maybe you've experienced it, is we really don't get the reliability, which probably 30% or 40% of the reliability of our diesel fleet. So at that point, I don't really get a chance to run them significantly, so I can get really good data over a long period of time. What ends up happening, both with the challenges of charging the vehicle itself and the vehicle itself just not performing as well as its diesels, I really haven't put it through its paces. So that's giving us a bit of angst as we try and grow that fleet. I don't know if you've experienced charges with your BYDs with respect to charging them, but our charging reliability is probably 60 to 70% when I plug it in now. Well, hopefully, as we get to the OCPP standards of 1.6, both for the vehicle and the chargers themselves, we can get to a higher reliability. I mean, I have my own electric car and I never have a problem charging, but it's not the same with the vehicles, our buses itself, and they have integration issues. And at that point, since the reliability is not there, we don't push them enough. So I feel comfortable doing a 1-for-1 exchange at this time. Hopefully we'll get to a better place in the near term. And then we also agree that we're looking in the hydrogen space, and hopefully that will give us, the range that we currently have and the filling times that we currently have on our diesel fleets. But in and of itself, having a fuel cell has its own challenges.
I would add for hydrogen that I think some of the things that you do prepare for electrification might be the same for hydrogen. I think talking to your utility, I think we're going to see some utilities that are blending in hydrogen or maybe providing hydrogen in the future. So checking in with your utility early to find out if they have any plans around that area. And then I would also suggest, if you do have a hub opportunity in your vicinity, you should have some early discussions with them. If that is something that you'd even consider, start early engaging with them to see what the opportunities are and what kind of support they could provide you. And also be aware of tax credits if you pay taxes, and incentives and grants that are coming out in their timelines. So you can include that all in your planning.
Great. Hindsight's 2020. What would you do differently? Sitting where you are now, knowing what you know today, what would you do differently as you plan for your fleet transition?
Bill?
Everyone hit it out of the park?
I think we did not get our utility well enough involved in ours up front, and now we're working with them on it, but that's one thing. You don't know what you don't know. I agree with Bart. We've had kind of hit or miss sometimes on charging. We'll get the bus plugged in, we'll come back in the morning and it didn't charge for some reason. The charger went down or something happened. We're getting better at it, but we've had to just do a bit of tweaking, and I don't know how we would have done something different, honestly, but it's definitely a learning curve, and it's different from running a diesel fleet. Absolutely.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would agree with Bill. We're kind of just learning as we go. And so, everybody's kind of learning, as they're going through this process. And so I don't know if there's any particular thing I'd say I would do 100% differently. It's just kind of learning as you go. And every time you get a new round of buses, you figure out what's working well, what doesn't work well. I think ideally we would have loved to have a fleet charging system in our barn right away, but that technology wasn't there. So we have 4 CPE 250s in our bus barn. So they're your standard level 3s. And I think if that technology was there, it would have been nice to directly go with a fleet charging system with kind of, consolidated charging cabinets and dispensers. But when we ordered the buses in 2020, that technology wasn't there. But it's, I think we're kind of same learning, and that technology is changing too. I mean, it's pretty amazing, kind of what we've noticed from the first round of buses that we got to the buses we'll have next year, and I expect that to kind of continue.
All right. I think we've probably run through that second bullet, run the traps on that second bullet, unless there's other directors who have further follow-up. So what would you recommend to do immediately? What's worked? What would you do differently? What would you watch out for? I think panelists really did it. I think now as we sort of shift to the policy making side of the house, we are working with staff to try to set a target to achieve net zero or zero emissions. And I think for all of you, have you set a date? And if so, what do you think a reasonable date would be for RTD to transition?
I'll take. Go ahead.
Good. So for us, the goal is to be 100% battery electric by 2032. And we get that just from looking at our replacement schedule. And so at this point, every time we have a diesel bus that reaches its end of its useful life, we replace it with a battery electric bus. And so that puts us out to 2032. We're lucky in that our service area is not super big. So, our longest vehicle block is 330 miles. And so, I feel relatively confident that we'll be able to get there, even just doing depot charging. If I think there's two scenarios that we'll see. We have our replacement schedule is not super symmetric. So we'll have 12 battery electric buses by 2024. Then we'll have 5 years where we're not going to replace a bus just because of how our schedule is kind of laid out. And then we replace 2/3 of our fleet between 2029 and 2032. And so I see one is that technology improves. And so we have a true 1-to-1 replacement for any block in our system by 2029. Then it's relatively straightforward. Then you're just replacing vehicles. The other scenario is maybe we don't have that range and we need to swap buses out. But I think for us, understanding our vehicle blocks and our use cases are really important, because for us, swapping buses is relatively easy. As long as we can swap a bus late enough in the day, so 10 or 11 o'clock, we should be able to take a bus that we've deployed in some of our peak period service. You could charge it in the middle of the day. It goes out of service at like 6 p.m. And then you can put it back into service and finish that remaining portion of that long block. So I feel pretty confident that we'll get to a point where we'll be 100% battery electric and we won't necessarily have to expand our fleet size. But we're a slightly unique case because our service area is smaller. And so without really understanding your guys' kind of whole system and kind of what your needs are, it's kind of hard to have a date, especially if you think you might need to go in a different technology instead of battery electric. I mean, that throws a whole other complication into it.
We do have that 2030 goal for our hop fleet, but we're only talking 17. What was 17 diesel buses that between what we have and what we have grants for already, 10 are down. So the other 7 will come around by 2030. Later in the decade, I would be a proponent of looking at hydrogen, assuming that's doable here in the state by then. I think it probably will be over the next couple of years, just having some fuel. And I see some of the California agencies doing that now, and even in smaller agencies, they're trying some hydrogen vehicles. So I do think that part of the fleet is reachable by the end of the decade. The other vehicles, that'll be harder. We really have to see how electrics work on a cutaway size vehicle. Are we going to get the range we need to do the routes we need to do for paratransit and microtransit? And especially probably not being able to charge en route. So bringing it back every night. Some of those buses are out for 12 and 14 hours. So don't know if that's doable, but that's our goal at the moment. And again, the technology will get better. So as we get through, can we make that 2035? We've got a dozen years to do it.
I do want to take a moment to pause because I realize this might be helpful for you all. Ms. Johnson, do you or a member of your team know, just sort of share a bit briefly on how big is our fleet? How many depots do we operate out of? How many of those do we own and how many of those do we not own? Sort of paint a picture for folks.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will start and then yield the floor to Mr. Worthen. I want to thank all the participants for their comments. Having been in the space across the country at 7 different transit agencies and recognizing the issues that have been put forward, I can totally empathize with that as we look at workforce being a major issue when you've had mechanics that have been in roles, a diesel mechanic for 25 years. And when we talk about the workforce, understanding the difference between feathering the brakes and regenerative braking. And as we look at blocks, Chris, to your point, that's very important when we think about our duty cycles and what we're doing going forward. So I appreciate the candor as relates to where we are collectively. So one thing's for certain, that we do contract out our fleet. We have about 1,000 vehicles, and recognizing that half of those vehicles of which we own are maintained by a third-party contractor. There are different aspects around how we would basically convert, and then recognizing our vast service area, there's a lot of issues problematically going forward as we discern what might that be. And then the last issue I would like to raise before yielding the floor to Mr. Worthen is relating to our useful life of our vehicles, and recognizing the board is aware that we did recently take delivery of some diesel buses. And, you know, we have to keep those 12 to 15 years or 500,000 miles pursuant to the FTA. So those are all different things that we need to be cognizant of. And so as we look at our replacement schedule as well, that is something hand in hand that we will look at. And to Maria's point as well, when you look at funding sources, it's important to look at the elements of the grant and the timing. And as the board knows, as we look at where we are with our additional delivery of buses as a whole, that's a critical factor for us. So with that, Mr. Worthen, if you could please speak to more of the transit service delivery of which you have auspices over, I would greatly appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. We actually have just short of 1,100 buses, and we operate in a 2,400 square mile service area. We have 8 facilities. 4 of those facilities are contracted, and 2 of those 4 facilities are owned by the contractors. The other 2 are on longer term leases themselves. We have 36 vehicles right now that are in revenue service on the mall itself. We're running between 292 kilowatt to 330 kilowatt hour batteries on those particular buses. We have 30 chargers and transformers at our Platte operating base, which houses that particular fleet. We also have 17 other vehicles that are on order right now, battery electric buses that will be housed out of our East Metro fleet itself.
Thank you. I realize asking a question without giving people a little background would be tough to opine on.
Okay, I've answered that question many times. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Just to repeat, you know, I think for those present on the call, if you set a date, you know, what is it? And I think, you know, hearing what you just heard from Fred Worthen and Deborah Johnson, what is, from your perspective, just sort of a reasonable, broad time frame to make this transition?
Well, Ms. Johnson had a good point in that, you know, you really can't do it till all of your buses come around for, you know, hit their useful lives and can be replaced. So that, you know, that's kind of the soonest you could do it. And can you get there by then? You'd really have to start buying nothing but, you know, zero emission vehicles from now and till forever. And, you know, is the agency ready to do that? It's a tough question. I don't know that we're ready yet. We still are going to take some delivery on some more gasoline powered vehicles, but even those will come up before 2035. They're smaller. So I think we are committed on the small transit fleet that we have to either electrify or, again, I'd love to see later in the decade hydrogen, but it might be later if and you know the fleet size is another issue. Can the fleet, can you replace one for one? Right now, I would say that's probably no. And then will the EVs last the 12 plus years? Will the batteries last the 12 plus years? And I know we run diesels that are 15 and more years old. So, sometimes we just keep those buses longer. Will the EVs be able to do that? I think that's mostly unknown at this point. So long answer to it kind of pushes that date out farther and farther.
Lynn, jump right in. Full discussion, no hands.
Great, thanks. I think this is mostly for Maria. You mentioned the state goal of 1,000 transit vehicles on the road by 2030. And I don't know, it makes me think, well, RTD's the big gorilla here, of course. Is there a plan to move to that? Is there an expectation? The conversations, what's the vision there if there is one?
Yeah, and so I'm not, again, I mentioned Mike King from CDOT. He's the point on this, but they did develop a transit zero emission vehicle roadmap.
Right.
And that was to identify strategies, policies, and funding levels necessary to achieve that state goal. CDOT engaged with transit and local governments and utilities developing that roadmap. It has 37 identified actions, and it really informed that clean transit enterprise that will be funding some of this. So I would point to that document for kind of the articulation of how the state sees that rolling out.
Okay, thanks.
Andrew, pop on and off mute a few times. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a specific date that should necessarily be targeted, other than trying to do it obviously as fast as possible, but within the means. The biggest thing that our fleet, and we don't have a fleet of transit buses, we have a mixed fleet of vehicles that are used to support our campus. We have the executive order to be, to transition all the GSA owned vehicles to zero emission vehicles. But, at present, it's a challenge for us to get electric vehicles. And, it's one of those things where I think that there are some residual impacts of COVID that have helped exacerbate some of the supply stream issues. So I think that should be, something to consider. I think that, it's one of those things where we have an added level of, okay, we can only purchase things off of the GSA schedule. So, that adds some extra certifications on that part. But yeah, I mean, there are there's probably some low-hanging fruit for, vehicles that don't go as far that could be electrified right now. But then there are some, like the 310-mile route, Chris, that I think that you mentioned, that sounds, like it's at the edge of technological limits. And then there's been a lot of talk, Bill, you mentioned the battery degradation over time. Typically, if you're charging, about once a day, 2,500 cycles is kind of a ballpark estimate that I've seen in some of the literature, saying that's when you'll have about 80% battery life left, and that would happen at about 8 years. And a lot of the federal regulations are that you need to replace batteries or replace buses every 12 years. So understanding that impact. I know that there are companies like Proterra. I don't know about New Flyer, but there's, they have battery leasing options that allow you to basically replace that battery at year 8 so you can continue your service without degradation. And then, the hope is that battery then gets used in a sort of second life scenario where it's being used for grid services or other types of, low energy density, but high power use cases. So that's why I was struggling with your question about when a specific date is, because I think that understanding the duty cycle is very important when making that decision.
So here at New York, we have a 2040. That's where our goal is to be zero emissions. We've publicly stated that beginning in 2028, everything's supposed to be zero emissions. I mean, I echo everyone else, understanding that as technology gets there, we'll move along, but that's our goal. We do have a couple of diesel procurements out there now. And although we have a 12-year replacement life, I think over my lifetime at the agency, 30 plus years, I think we've had 12 to 15 buses that we actually replaced in the 12-year cycle. Significantly, we run them longer. There's a need for it. New deliveries don't come in, so for that point. We're also, I guess the concern here is, and I echo it with many of you, is to get your electric supplier in there. Even if you're looking at the hydrogen space, if you have a hydrogen hub close by, that's great. If not, to create it on property requires a significant number of energy, significant amount of energy. So you're going to have to work with your utility sooner or later, rather getting them on board. And the city itself, New York, they've also started to ban natural gas for heating at some of our newer buildings. I don't remember when that's going to go into effect. So our utility is looking at electric heating from many of our buildings. So that's another draw on the grid at the same time we're trying to draw when we do our overnight charging.
So we have another fleet, Fred, right? We have a fleet of paratransit vehicles, which are smaller, cutaways, et cetera. How many of those, and is there any point in looking at how those could be electrified?
Let me get the numbers for you on that. We do have several hundred of them. I think I have the numbers in my
Several hundred is good. I don't want to know exactly.
Part of the challenge that we have with the paratransit side of the house is two things. One is the vehicle availability is of course one thing, but the other component is those are 100% contractor facilities. I know that at least one of our facilities is owned by a contractor. I believe the other three are currently leased facilities themselves. So again, the not owning facility is a challenge. And going back to Andrew, some of the question or the comments you made also, one of the other challenges we have is we have 40 to 50-year-old operating bases that are at maximum capacity across the board, electricity, everything else. So it's not just the capital purchases, it's the infrastructure component as well. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. I got one more. Just for the record, our utility is on the call and listening. So that's a good first step. Thanks, Brody.
Thank you. I think I want to turn to probably the least exciting for some and the most exciting for others question in the room, which is how do you pay for it? How are you funding? For those of you who are looking at one-to-one, how are you funding the procurement? For those of you who have asset transition plans, how have you identified the future funds? And I think sort of a timely matter, is anyone exploring, the direct pay option under the Inflation Reduction Act or other public-private partnership financing options that are available, that are newly available under the IRA?
So we've used a whole range of whether it's local, state, or federal funds, and it's just been really aggressive in applying for grant funding when it comes available. So if it kind of go through all the different buses we have, 3 are locally funded. 1 is low-no 5339C. 2 will be 5339B, 4 are kind of settlement funding, like state funding, and then 2 are were congressionally directed spending, so an earmark. And so really it was, you know, we knew we had X number of buses were going to replace in, you know, 2023, you know, it was a NOFO for grant funding, and we applied. I mean, granted, these are a lot smaller numbers, and, you know, we have 33 buses in our fleet, so you're asking for funding for 1 or 2 buses at a time compared to, you know, 50. So I imagine on a large urban agency, it's a different story. But for us, it's just been, you know, being aware of the different funding sources out there, and then just applying when there are NOFOs available.
Via's model is very similar. We need to get grant funding for our vehicles, and at least, you know, most of the grants are 80%. Sometimes on the electric vehicles, we'll get up to 90% funding. Same, we've got 5339, a couple of chapters there. We've gotten faster funding. We've gotten VW settlement money. We'd be looking forward in the future to the Clean Transit Enterprise. Though as the state starts electrifying, that money will go quickly. You know, the model with the VW settlement was an interesting model where the CDOT or the federal funding was for the kind of the base vehicle. You know, what would it cost to buy a gasoline or diesel vehicle? And then the settlement money made up the difference to make it electric. And while that money lasted, that was a good way to get into this, to start electrifying. Is, you know, we got the first half of the money because rule of thumb is these vehicles are twice as expensive. So maybe the Clean Transit Enterprise will end up being that type of funding again, and we'll still have federal funding for kind of the base amount. But I don't know how it'll turn out. And you know, Chris's point was excellent. You all have a much larger fleet to replace. It's easier for us to get, you know, 2-3 buses at a time than looking for 50 or 100. And still not easy.
All right, looks like you might be having some technical challenges, but would welcome your voice on this as someone who operates, I believe, a pretty similarly sized, if not certainly larger operation. How are you funding your transition?
You're talking to Bart?
Yeah.
I don't know if I didn't hear that name called, so I don't know. Hey,
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I was interrupted.
No worries. We had just heard fleet size is a big issue, and you all operate, or I guess, a bigger fleet than we do. How are you funding your transition, and how are you planning for funding your transition, knowing you have a mandate coming up in 18 years to fully be there?
So currently on our capital plan, we have a 20-year needs, and we project funding for the next 4 capital programs. So in that case, we've projected the delta from what we had initially indicated for our diesel or hybrid fleets on it. So we're putting that into our capital capital needs for the next 20 years. So currently we're in the 20 to 24. We anticipate, depending on the funding, for 1,000 buses in the 25 to 29 range. And then from that point, all the vehicle replacements are considered to be zero emissions. We've probably added another $350,000 to $400,000 to each of our previous diesel purchase dollars to kind of project it, and also look to significantly add money to the infrastructure. So that's what our capital plan looks like. Now, although we go out for capital plans, each capital plan in and of itself gets approved. Now, the nuance in New York State is that, or at least for us, is that our our board approves the capital plan, but the funding is kind of given incrementally over that. So in that case, although the plan's approved, we may not see the money for a year or two for the first year or two of the capital plan. So it kind of delays some of our purchases, but at least we're projecting where we are based on our fleet size, currently about 5,800 buses.
And just to put a fine point on that, just make sure I'm hearing you correctly. It sounds like you are able or planning to be able to make this transition by 2040, start doing a one-to-one replacement by 2028. But that's because you have state funding and state support.
Yes, we typically, for us, most of our federal funding actually goes to the rail side of the house. So in that case, we did get a recent funding. It was, for us, it was significant over the, what other agency got, but for us, it was, I hate to say it was it was about 10% of what it is. Don't mean to be, that's exactly what it was. So that's where we're currently in that space. So using that money, we kind of anticipated, like someone had mentioned earlier, that we had anticipated our diesel dollars, and we used the money coming in with the grant to pay for the Delta. So in that case, we projected with the $116 million, we kind of figured that's kind of probably going to get us about 400 to 450 vehicles that were initially budgeted as non-zero emissions to zero emissions because of the delta in the funding itself. I think my calculations are off, but we understand. So the infrastructure is where we're seeing issues that COVID and supply chains are definitely moving that work to the right. We're going to have to accelerate that if we want to reach our 2040 goal.
Great. Thank you. I do want to note for the record, and I keep forgetting to do so, that Director Sloan has joined us as well. Thank you, Director Sloan, for being here. At this point, if anyone has any closing remarks, brief closing remarks, would certainly welcome them, and then we will go ahead and close this out. Yeah, Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say to Maria, I am very interested in learning more about your Hydrogen Coalition work. So if you don't have my contact information, we'll make sure that it gets passed on to you. I've been very interested in that particular aspect and whatever I can do to help. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd really like to talk to you. Thanks.
I just want to know if Mr. Stoppelkamp, who has everything to do with all the facilities that support this discussion, has anything that he wants to add.
I think that the biggest challenge, and listening more on the fleet size, we heard a little bit of the charging. If we go hydrogen, it's the fuel, it's the propulsion, and it's facility. So I would share with everybody on here, and for panelists, correct me if I'm wrong, but to start up a new facility, we're talking anywhere between 3 to 8 years. And Fred mentioned that we've got basically 4 RTD facilities, 3 divisions, and then our district shops. And when we house 200 buses each one of these facilities, we go nose to tail, 5 foot between. Electric buses, we need a little bit more room, bigger footprint. So there's gonna be a challenge for our own fleet, but then also the contracted fleet for their infrastructure. So it's going to be this is where we've been talking about transition plan. What will it take? And we really need to incorporate it as a system. And I think if the board members have heard me talk about this before, we're looking at a system. We're not looking at buying buses. The buses may be the easy part. It's the entire system, the blocks, the duration, the mechanics, the operators, and where do we house everything? And which community wants them? And do we do multiple facilities over the 2,400 square miles? So, I really enjoyed listening to the individuals and a lot of concerns and a lot of statements they've made. Fred and I have been talking with over the last several months, trying to get a better understanding. But we do have 36 buses in the Platte facility. We've lucked out. It has worked, but the grid, we're right on the end of the grid, but Excel has expanded down there, which has really helped us out. Now we turn that into the 36 to 200 buses. That's an awful lot of power draw to pull into the facility. So those are my concerns, and I think the board has heard it before, and I do appreciate Director Williams for asking the question.
If I can interject, I know Danny Ilioio is on the call. It's fine if we get some background on how he is, when he was at Washington, how he grew to get like to start the zero emissions from ground one, because I think they were looking to create a facility. Danny, if you don't mind.
I don't know that he can speak if he's in the
Okay.
participants part of the call.
All right, my apologies. Thank you.
Oh, no, I think, is there
Maybe-
staff, is there a way to unmute?
There you go.
Danny
He
can
got
unmute.
elevated. He can speak now.
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted now.
Go ahead,
All right,
Danny.
can you folks hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Bart. Thanks all. So I was at 4 years at King County Metro in Seattle. Before that, 16 and a half years at New York City Transit. Did quite a bit of work in this space. Just wanted to throw some numbers at you. $500,000 per bus for infrastructure, $500,000 per bus as an add-on cost in terms of budgeting. These numbers were based on some work that I've done with economists at both agencies. It's important because initially you can use low-no grants and other kind of funding methods, so you can do some pilot programs. But in terms of organizational transition plan, so you can be 100% zero emissions and then follow up and keep operating these vehicles, you'd probably want to bump up your budget by about $1 million per bus in today's money. I'm going to pause here if you have any questions.
Danny, can you give us some contact information for you? So if we wanted to follow up after this? No? Yes? That's all right. We'll get it from Bart. He knows who you are.
If you can hear me, ask the question again, please, and let me know specifically what you're looking for.
I'm looking for your email or your phone number or your name or something. So if we wanted to ask you some more stuff, we could.
Yeah. If you want to follow up, so my email is D as in Danny, .ilioiu, ILIOIU, @icloud.com. And my phone number is 917-374-8286. So if you didn't get my email or if whatever, just send me a text and I'll send you all the information you need.
All right. Thanks, Danny.
Awesome.
As we look at 1,100 buses, a few hundred cutaways, and a few hundred cars, that is a hefty, sobering price tag, I guess is what I'll say, but one that if you were to account for the social cost of carbon, that each of these buses, if they were to remain, might pencil out to be pretty close.
Yeah, so just another note, 2035 to 2040 is a good goal for you or a good target for you. I think anything below that is unrealistically aggressive. And primarily because all of the work that we did at King County Metro, but also New York City Transit, if you're thinking about bus infrastructure, 5 years to convert a depot or a bus garage or a bus base, 2 years to purchase buses. Those are very realistic numbers. However, the industry right now, and I think I heard Chris, or I forgot the gentleman's name mentioned earlier, you don't really have full mature vehicles available for your cutaway vans or for your non-bus fleet. So if you want to become a 100% carbon neutral or zero emissions fleet, you also have to integrate your non-bus fleet with your bus fleet into whatever solutions you're going for, whether that's going to be battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell. And that's a challenge I think every transit agency has. And if you listen to them carefully, and if you ask them, what about your non-bus fleet? You're going to see that a lot of agencies who are going to be like, well, I'm going to do 60% by 2040, or I'm going to do 50% by 2035. So just background and context.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Danny, our experience here in talking to our non-revenue fleet is they just don't see the enough of an industry yet. So at that point, I think we did discuss box trucks, but besides that, a lot of that specialized equipment is just not there. So we don't know if that's even feasible within the next 5 years. I guess within the next 5 years, they're looking to find out if the industry is moving in that direction to zero emissions, whether it's, and I think we kind of believe that they're mostly being a hydrogen space for those specialized vehicles rather than the all electric, just because of the weight and where you can charge.
Bart and Danny, I so appreciate you coming on right now. I know though that we were certainly oversubscribed for panelists for this session. So if you come back, we'd love to have you. I think we're looking at having convening another group of experts in January. So love to have you back. Anyone else have any?
Thank you. Just send me an invite. I'll be more than happy to help.
Wonderful. Thank you. Are there any other sort of closing comments from folks? Directors, staff?
Yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, I've been a little quiet. I just wanted to thank all our guests and our panelists for taking the time. It's been very beneficial. And I also wanted to thank the staff who organized this, of course, and then Ms. Johnson and her team and all of her senior leadership team members for being here, and looking forward to the next one, which again is public, which anyone can listen and attend. So thank you.
Same. I was going to say the same thing. This is a great start to a discussion that we need to have in our agency to get things moving. And I really, really appreciate you guys all being here. Thanks.
All right. Well, with that, I certainly echo everyone's comments. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be here with us this afternoon, to share your advice, to share your wisdom. If committee members, I know you said 4:30, committee members and any of the staff want to hang out too as well once our experts leave us, please feel free to do so. I know we have a little bit of tidying up to do before this goes before executive committee on Thursday. So as a reminder, thank you all again so much for being here. Thank you for your time. Please go out and vote. If you are in the Denver metro area, RTD is free today. In order to vote, please, you can drop your ballot or vote in person. This committee will be bringing in recommended action before the executive committee on November 10th, 2022 at 12 p.m. Public comment is available at RTD's standing meetings, which includes the executive committee. And a policy will come before the full board on November 15th, 2022. That meeting begins at 5:30 p.m. Thank you all so much, and we'll talk to you all soon. Committee members, anyone's welcome to stay on, but we do have to decide on what we're putting before our exec committee on Thursday. So thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bobby, I took some pretty extensive notes, which I'm happy to type up.
Yeah.
And get to the four of us before we proceed. So I will do that before Thursday. Might be tomorrow night, but
yeah,
get them to everybody.
Go ahead, Julian.
I was just going to say, just to clarify, are we still good for noon tomorrow having the conversation? Are we still planning as a committee to meet or no?
We had taken that off the calendar because really, at this point, right, the policy is a matter of picking a number, right, to be revisited. And I think I would definitely say after hearing today's conversation, I think 2038 is probably too aggressive. I don't think that's feasible. I think just from what we heard today, that just doesn't seem like it's, Henry.
I'd just like to throw out to the group, Kate asked the question, and I'll just follow up a little bit, but the big unknown is the transition with the infrastructure.
Yeah.
40-year-old facilities, to modify an existing facility may or may not make sense. I would highly recommend not modifying, but then we need to figure out where do we put them. And then the question is, how do we get into the whole NEPA process, clearing the sites and go down that path? So that could be a long drawn out process. Not saying it can't be done and that it shouldn't be done. I think it should be done, but I just want to let everybody know that you really have to look at it as a system and throw all those elements in there. The one thing you heard from the group here, you're looking at 36 buses, 17 buses. Okay. We're looking at 1,000 buses at $1 million a piece. That adds up pretty darn quick. That's just for the infrastructure, not even the bus. So, we really need to look and see, and I think Fred will verify that. I mean, we're both here to help out, and if you need anything from us, just pipe up, and we will see what we can do to help out.
Yeah, and I will note that as currently drafted, it's revisited, I think, annually to check progress, as well as after the asset transition plan. I think one big takeaway I had is the biggest agency we had on the line was New York. I intentionally sort of dug in on that question, which is they're able to hit 2040 because it's underwritten by the state. And that's a huge, I don't need to restate the importance here. So, Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about this matter. And I want to thank you all for your interest, quite naturally, as being the policymakers and asking staff about our perspectives. And I appreciate that. In the instance of full disclosure, I had a conversation with Director Geisinger earlier today, and some of the issues that the panelists brought up are the same ones that I spoke to, as I'm concerned about the workforce issue. And as we look at supply chain and things along the lines. And then more specifically, just talking about a transition plan, and I'm just qualifying is that in and of itself, because when we talk about the due diligence we need to do relative to actually doing a solicitation to have an understanding about route modeling, and that's what our panelist from Vail was speaking to as it relates to how we currently do run cutting and things of the like. Those are very important factors, but the one piece as we talk about where we are, and Henry touched upon this, that's why I decided to raise my hand, is like we first have to start with that roadmap in reference to what the transition plan, and look at the entire complement of what is available as it relates to zero emissions, and then discern what it is that we need for a facility. Because in and of itself, while we have this transitional plan and whatever consultant we select and say they're working with the University of West Virginia, the University of Texas, or University of California, Davis, it doesn't matter which one, but we have to understand what our model might look like in reference to service planning, and then ensuring that we have the appropriate facilities. And that's where the time will take. So I really appreciate Henry's comments about it being a system, and recognizing that, yeah, it is about $1 million per bus, and recognizing where we are with our facilities and that investment that needs to be made in the infrastructure. If we procure these buses and we don't have any place to put them, then they're for naught, recognizing the warranty and all the other aspects. And especially when we look at other agencies across the country, recognizing that in some areas, folks that do have goals that were set in 2040, they've been working on this since 2012. And so as we go forward, we have to be intentional. And I agree, we can set, as long as we all have an understanding that we have to be nimble and flexible, because there's so many external factors in reference to Buy America standards, in reference to, the chassis and getting the bus certified through the Federal Transit Administration, what we know is to be Altoona testing, because it happens in Altoona, Pennsylvania. There's a myriad of different issues of which we have to be cognizant of that have residual impacts of the overarching delivery. It's not just the bus itself, it's the other components of that. So just wanted to state that for the record, so you all have the opportunity to hear what I shared with Director Geisinger, recognizing what Henry said. We support this. However, in our spaces, we have to be sure that we understand the practicalities of the implementation going forward, because some of these aspects are beyond our control holistically. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to state that for the record.
Thank you. I have Director Bouquet next.
Yeah, thank you. I think again, I'm looking at the proposed language that would be going for the executive committee on Thursday. And I think after this, I just would caution ultimately when it comes down to, and this is what I'm, hearing from a lot of folks, is when it comes down to setting that date when ultimately, again, the reevaluation, it's not the procurement of the vehicles, it's the system itself, and that's what we heard time and time over again. So I don't want to repeat it too much, but I guess my biggest caution would be ultimately setting up a date with saying, we want to be zero emissions at, even 2050, 2040, 2050, that would just be my caution to having that as specific language compared to, we obviously, don't want to speak for everyone, but there's obviously a need and there's a desire for us to lower our emissions, Can we put it into language where that's where we're at right now? And can we reevaluate later on? I know it's in the language right now of the proposed action that we would reevaluate this on an annual basis. Can we start it off with the goal of just lowering emissions, putting it wide enough so that we're not putting our senior leadership team in a hard situation where, again, it just seems like a lot of questions right now compared to what we heard overall with the panels. Again, like Ms. Johnson said, these are plans for 2040 that have been put in place much earlier than what we're discussing right now. That would just be my big thing is, are we constricting it too much by putting a date in the language? So thank you.
Yeah, I hear that. And I think I'm sort of leaning more towards something in the 2045 range, but I also want to push back. The reason why everyone's putting out zero emission policies is to help prevent global warming by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the scientific community has said you need to have a 50% reduction of 2005 baseline level by 2030. So as a committee, we decided that was going to be too aggressive. We stripped that out of our policy. And so while I hear you, absolutely, we don't want to put ourselves in a tough spot. I also think, and I know we've seen this already under Ms. Johnson's leadership, that we have to rethink the way that we do things, because the reality is we can't afford to wait, right? Because otherwise there's no real purpose in putting together a policy if we're not going to commit to lead and to being strong there. And as opposed to, one of the biggest comments I know we all hear is, well, what's a good thing to do? And here's a real opportunity to say, look, we set the goal. We called on our partners. We went and reached out to folks. And if we don't hit, I don't think that's just on RTD. I think it's a reality is that it's on the community. We all really need to work together to get there. Lynn.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I had a good conversation. Sounds like I'm getting hoarse. A conversation with Deborah today, and this was helpful. I guess I'm thinking about the state's goals, and that those kind of, to me, are an outer parameter. 2050 for 100% transit, zero emission transit fleet. 2040 for total renewables, which is mostly the grid, but something that can guide us certainly as we're building facilities and adding renewables. And the 1,000 transit vehicles on the road by 2030. What portion of that can and should be RTDs? And looking at those, we could set a time, or we could ask staff and Fred to come back with an aggressive goal and maybe a more comfortable goal, and look at them at that point. And I recognize, we need the plan, and that, I think, is something that I know, Deborah, when we talked today, you said it could be an 18-month thing. It feels like we're missing money with that process. And so, for the board to fund that at a higher level to make it move quicker would seem like an appropriate policy step for us. So those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Director Geisinger. Just to provide some context, when we talk about missing money, I want to be clear, as we talk about the bipartisan infrastructure law, what Director Geisinger is referencing is the low or zero emission discretionary grant funding opportunity because we need to have a transition plan. However, there's still money available as we look at, bus and bus facilities, which is another program as well that's afforded to transit agencies for discretionary funding. And more so, their state programs, as we've seen throughout a myriad of different states. For instance, in California, they have the low carbon operators program where they use cap and trade dollars to fund. So there is a myriad of money. However, what I want to be clear on when I talked about 18 months, I'm talking about a solicitation because regardless of the fact we need a transition plan, and even if we put more money for the transition plan, that would not necessarily dictate that would be done in a more expeditious fashion. So I support everything that Director Geisinger said, but I thought it was important that I clarified and provided context around that transition plan. So thank you very much for the opportunity to explain.
Director Cook.
Thank you. Thanks for putting on this session today. It was really interesting. I just wanted to voice agreement with the idea that rather than the board or the committee even picking a number and setting that goal, seems to me that the better way would be for the staff to set that. But I think we need to commit to setting a goal. We need to actually say, we're going to do this transition. We're not going to try and get better arms around all the challenges. We're going to figure out what it'll take to get around them. So I guess I agree with the idea of asking you staff, bring us a target, tell us what you can do. And I like the idea of an aggressive one as well. So thank you very much.
Director McKay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I just don't, again, as anyone has spoken to me, I'm all for aggressive plan. I just don't want to put our staff in a situation that's going to be tricky for them. I don't want to put them I don't want them to fail ultimately, and so that's where, again, I want to put, kind of I hate to say that, put the ball in their court when it comes down to it, but it's like, hey, if we say we want it by 2040, if that's even reasonable or not, that would be just my big pushback, and that might be a question going back.
Just to quickly push back, right? If we say, okay, we're going to take the full time of the scientific community 2050, to me, you either set a goal of 2050 or earlier, or you don't set a goal at all, because the market will just demand you shift that way eventually, right? So the question is, what are we really doing here?
I'm gonna let Fred speak.
Yeah, Fred, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to remind everybody that, when we start talking about this, we aren't just talking about the vehicles and the infrastructure. We are talking about the money. And I did send this information out through the board's office. I don't know if it was distributed to everybody, but the feds themselves and the low-no funding are putting about $1.1 billion a year into the low-no program. And to put that into perspective, they had 248 low-no applications last year, and they were only able to fund 150 of those particular projects. They actually had over $7.71 billion in requests for $1.1 billion of available funding. So as we start talking about this, I think you're hearing from others that the feds aren't going to be able to cover this. We're not going to be able to cover this out of our own local operating budget either. So there's work to be done with getting assistance from other areas to be able to fund this. Even if we adopt a plan, the paying for a component is still a big question to be addressed.
Yeah. There were hands and then they disappeared. Lynn.
Yeah, maybe we should talk to Mike King sooner than later. I don't know if you have, Fred, but my understanding is that they're pulling together, CDOT is pulling together the enterprise funding and maybe a single application for the or process or timing or something for the federal, the low-no grants. That I hear you that there's a lot of people going after that money, but it's 1.1 billion for what is it, the next 10 years?
I've just seen through 2026. I know the enterprise has $85 million. And I believe that's over a 10-year period, but don't hold me to that.
The state enterprise?
The state enterprise. I know it's 85 million, but I can't remember the exact period of time that it's over.
And Bobby, I hear what you're saying too, and that's why I'm thinking, that there are these goals in the state. And I'm not saying we have to mirror those exactly, but certainly it feels like we need to be at least within those, 100% by 2050, 1,000 vehicles on the road by 2030. What portion of that, should we be shooting for, or can we be shooting for? And I think that's really a question that that we can ask staff. Is, in my opinion, those are sort of the outlying, the latest we could go, and then what can we do to move it forward more quickly?
Yeah, I think, where I kind of go back and forth is, the frustration I've certainly had as a board member is we try to make sure we have everything 100% perfectly lined up before making any action. We want to study it, and then we want to study the study, and then we want to study the study that studied the study. And then we need to refresh the study because it's been 4 years, and then we need to study that study again to make sure we're ready to move forward. And this is an area where we don't have the luxury of time for climate change. And with new technology, we have to be able to move nimbly. And so part of the reason why I put a lot of sort of force behind we got to set a goal is it allows us to go out and say, yeah, we're working on it, and actually we're working towards this goal. And it gives us 2 feet to stand on, as opposed to a sort of perpetual, we're working on it and we're studying it, we're working on it, but we're studying it. It sort of draws a line in the sand, right? A line that can be changed. But I think that, if we're talking about making policy and working with staff, this is really where the rubber meets the road, right? This is the time to say, here's a policy, and staff tries to do it and says, this policy didn't work, and here's why. And then we adjust the policy. Because otherwise, we're not really making policy, right? We're just signing off.
Well, what do you think, anybody, of the idea of picking up the state's goals and saying we want to revisit this? I mean, I don't know, Fred, do you have goals in mind, particular targets, years, or is it just too hard to put that together?
It's been hard for me just because there's pieces of this that are outside my wheelhouse. Henry, the infrastructure component is really outside my wheelhouse. For me, just trying to figure out what the actual bus replacement ratio will be is where I have work to be able to figure out more about this. And then of course the funding questions are the real big issue. Even if we figure out the magic number of how many vehicles we need, how are we going to pay for this? So my wheelhouse is really figuring out the buses and the operational component. I would probably say that, having a little more work done on the actual blocking that our existing WSP is doing would help me a whole lot on at least figuring out a fleet replacement cycle. But again, the infrastructure side, that's way outside my wheelhouse, and that's where I depend on Henry and his team.
Deborah?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. One thing that I just want to iterate, as you all as the policy members discern the path forward relative to a date, one thing that I would offer up for your consideration is recognizing that I always operate from a vantage point is that when we make decisions, we have to have data in which to make an informed one, and recognizing we are having this conversation in the absence of having a transition plan. I think that's where we have an issue holistically, because in a fleet transition plan, you would be looking at the facilities, you would be looking at the duty cycles, you would be looking at the blocking, you would be looking at the fleet replacement plan. And so right now, the questions that are being posed are basically just with staff holistically leveraging experience, which we may be bringing from different areas, rooted in conjecture and speculation. So while I keep harping on the transition plan being paramount, I am firmly grounded in that. So, and I do recognize, Director Deschelle, you're spot on. The climate change is important and we have to act. And so if it is the board's intention of saying, okay, let's in fact have a target, then I support you all doing that with a caveat that when we get a full-fledged transition plan, that this needs to be revisited, because right now we don't know what we don't know, and there has not been an investment here at this agency as relates to maintaining our assets, specifically our bus facilities, in a state of good repair. And that's something in and of itself, because we could take delivery of an electric bus, but if we can't maintain it, and then more so investing in the workforce holistically, as I was very transparent with Director Geisinger, in reference to the comments I'm putting forth, they're not intended to appear to be resistant, but for all intents and purposes, if we have our frontline employees that don't embrace this, the ones that are on the floor that have to maintain this, or the trainers that have to ensure that they're training staff to operate in a zero emission vehicle, or those that are maintaining the facilities holistically, this whole discussion would be for naught. So I would encourage you to take that under advisement, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to express my concerns. Thank you.
Yeah, Henry?
Yes, since Fred threw it my way, I'd like to just throw a couple of things out there. Just give you an order of magnitude. I mean, fast tracks back in 2004, umpteen corridors, and then that was a $4.6 billion project. Multiple years put into it. This is a $2 billion plus endeavor. And it's also not everything that we have control of. We've got contractors out there that they have to do their facilities. We have to do our facilities. The blocking gets back down to where are our facilities? Are we going to go from mega facilities like Platte in East Metro, or are we going to go down to 50, 100 bus facilities scattered throughout? Now, the reason I'm throwing that out there is this is where our partners, the communities, are going to have to come in. We're going to have to find property, and we're going to have to buy the buses and build the infrastructure, or build the infrastructure and buy the buses, either way. But it's going to be scattered throughout Denver. That's something that most communities aren't familiar with, comfortable with. It doesn't bring in revenue for tax or anything else. So when you look at and populate these 20-acre facilities scattered throughout the metro area, we need to get our partners and everybody else involved with it. So it's not as simple as saying, okay, I need 10 bus facilities, 20 acres scattered throughout, boom, 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 boom. We also need to site it and get an agreement with the communities, the neighbors, and everything else. So this is really it's going to have to be a community outreach and community investment in protecting the planet Earth. And so I'm just throwing that out there. If we own the property and we're allowed to do what we want to do, that speeds up the process. But you throw all that in there, and what I think Deborah's mentioning, and I've said too on that transition plan, it's a transition plan for each step of the way. So what we're doing is creating the roadmap to get to where we need to be, and all the key elements. It's kind of like we're doing on the Northwest Railroad. Identify all the risk associated to RTD and the community, figure out how to mitigate the risk, and put a number to it, and then build a schedule. And that's what we had to do. So it's a huge exercise, but it's an exercise we should do as a entity and as a community. So you've got my support, my team's support, but I just want everybody to realize it just ties into so many different things.
Yeah, and I so appreciate that. I want to sort of get down to brass tacks and hopefully get out of here by 5 p.m. I think, on the one hand, it's exciting. We are really rebuilding an entire transit system in a way of operating. I think we're sort of at a junction point, right, where we can choose to lead and say to community, come along with us. We need you to come with us to help us site this facility. You can charge 2 school buses for this charter school here too, or whatever it might be. It's a whole new sort of full partnership wraparound. Or we can wait, and we can wait and ask for the community to call us in and come along. And so I think sort of, because we are sort of pressed for time here. And again, I so appreciate everyone's time. I think, Lynn and Julian, but try to sort of run through this to try to figure out what policy we want to put up on Thursday, and if we want to put up a policy at all. Just a quick yes, no's, if that's okay with you guys. So I guess, do we want to bring a policy forward on Thursday? Just a policy related to lowering emissions.
I don't feel like it has to happen on Thursday. If it does happen Thursday, I think we all agree with Deborah. It needs to be more data driven than it is right now. And so to me, the critical piece is let's get that transition plan going and let's move it forward as quickly as possible. And if we want to go with deadlines, we could pick something sooner, but I'd be okay picking the deadlines that are the state goals, because I feel like we are obligated to those, and that's the 2050, 100%, 2040 full renewables, and 2030. Their goal is 1,000 transit vehicles on the road. Certainly, some portion of that is ours. And we need to, kind of figure that out.
I would say, just from my perspective, it's absolutely data driven. I read at least 25 different agency transition plans, as well as reviewing our data and our staff. Those are made available to everyone. So I guess, and Lynn, I'm going to really try to hold you to an answer here. Do we want to bring forward a policy on Thursday or not? Yes or no?
Well, I just suggested a policy.
We said no, and then you said yes. So yes or no? Do you want to bring a policy forward to reduce emissions on Thursday? Yes or no?
Well, I'm not saying we shouldn't. I don't know that it has to be Thursday. It could be at our next meeting. What do you think?
No more meetings. It's Thursday and Tuesday.
No, there are more meetings. It'd be, I guess, in January, but it'd be coming up. Julian, what are you thinking?
So, Lynn, do you want to bring a policy forward? Yes or no?
I would like to hear what Julian thinks. I've thrown out a policy that I think makes sense. And I really would like to get the staff involved in hitting the numbers. So.
Julian, do you want to bring forward a policy to reduce emissions on Thursday? Yes or no?
Yes.
Lynn, do you want to bring forward a policy on Thursday to reduce emissions? Yes or no?
I think if it's a policy that is.
We're going to get there, Lynn. Just a real simple. Do you think we should bring forward a policy on Thursday to reduce emissions? Yes or no?
Where I am. I will go along with it if I like the policy.
Okay, so I'll mark you down as a no. I am a yes. Given there's three of us, we'll jump to the next one. Julian, do you think we should set a date for the policy that's being brought forward on Thursday?
No.
Lynn?
What was the question?
Do you think, trying to make sure everyone's here, right? Do you think we should set a date for the policy that's being brought forward on Thursday?
If I would embrace the state dates and ask the staff to move forward as quickly as possible on the plan, and to aim for an earlier date than 2050, if possible. How's that?
So yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a yes as well. Okay.
On that particular policy, is that what you're saying?
So I'm really just trying to, so I'm pulling apart, Lynn, the different aspects of the policy, because we have to collectively make a choice here. Right? So I know you want to sort of go on, and we're on the record and other people are here, but we got to sort of tease out, right, to make a policy and sort of move quickly. So from where we are, I'm hearing, yes, we want to bring something forward on Thursday. Yes, we want to tie a date to it. I'm going to start with lower numbers and go up, starting with where we last left off, which was 38, which I'm assuming the answer is no. But 2038, yes or no? Julie, yeah, thumbs up or thumbs down works.
Yes. Yes, 2038. Let's do it.
Julie's a yes on 38. Lynn's a no on 38. I'm a no on 38. 39.
You're a no on 38, you said?
Yeah.
This is not the way, I don't feel like this is the way to make policy.
We have to make a decision and we have to act quickly.
Okay, well, I put a proposal out there. Are y'all rejecting that?
I would say 2045 more so than 2050. You look at agencies across the country, you look at, if the state is honest in investing, if we want to lead, it's 2045. If we want to be brought along, it's 2050. And I'm at a point where I think we should be leading.
I was just gonna say, all right, you're the chair of the committee, Bobby. So I was just gonna say that if we want to be ambitious with it, and again, I understand your frustration where it's, do we get stuck in a data loop? Then let's be as ambitious as possible. And I think, again, it's if we want to lead the way, if we want to be bold, if we want to do this strategy, then a 2040 or a 2045 is what I'd be leaning towards. Totally understand though. I just want everyone to be aware though that we've gotten plenty of pushback and we will get pushback, just a heads up, on Thursday when it comes to setting the date. And that's why I voted no with setting the date. But to answer your question, I would be for a date of 2040 if that's what we ultimately want to go with. I would also be comfortable with the date of 2045. I'd be comfortable with the date of 2050. So.
By the way, Kate texted me that she had to go to another meeting.
Yeah. So, Julian, appreciate the call back in to say if I'm saying we want to lead, then we should pick a more ambitious goal than 45. So, I think 40. Why don't we pull? Am I able to share my screen? Yes. Okay. Okay, is my screen up?
Yes, you're sharing your screen right now.
Okay. Can everyone see the zero emission policy?
Yes.
What are thoughts on, instead of shall achieve, saying shall aim to, making it a goal as opposed to a binding commitment?
Yes, I'd be more comfortable with that. Again, I like being ambitious. What I'm very nervous about is us putting our staff in a situation of things that are out of their control. Ultimately, that'd be my big thing. So instead of shall, putting in the language aim towards, or however you would like to articulate it, by set date, and if we are going to set the date and if we are going to set that goal, then I feel like it should be more ambitious. But I also want to ultimately say the second paragraph has to be included. I'd be all for the language that's currently included, because we are all kind of overlooking and forgetting. If we really want to help lower emissions, it comes down to having a healthy public transit system. That is really how you're ultimately going to lower emissions. And again, you have to have language in there where we're not cutting service, where we continue to have the service itself, and that'd be my big thing. Again, is we don't want to, tie two hands behind our staff's back. Having the goal aiming towards net zero emissions, I would say by 2040, that would be my language. Happy to get suggestions though.
Lynn, what do you think?
I think if we set a date, I think aim to achieve, and I still think that the state's goals are sort of the kind of the outside of what we have to achieve. We could list those, aim to achieve at an earlier date. I've got to think about this. I want to be aggressive as well. I'm just not sure we're doing this the right way, but I would go with the aim to achieve. My preference would be 2045, and that in the process we get the plan, we shoot for some portion of that 1,000 vehicles on the road by 2030. And, that if the state says renewables all by 2040, we need to be part of that. Again, it's probably more the grid. And the outside date seems to be 2050.
Yeah.
But we could aim for something sooner if you want to phrase it that way.
And two things, if I could say, also in the language itself, it says reassessing this policy after we see the asset transition plan. That's the other thing for anyone, this policy after receiving an asset transition plan right there. So, it is the goal, it is the goal, but there is parts in the language that allows us to reevaluate this at any point, So I think that for, anyone who might be a little bit nervous about, going forward with it, there's plenty of language with it. And then I think be ambitious. Is it 2040? Is it 2045? Let's just be ambitious. In my opinion, let's go before the state standard, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with Julian. Aim to 2040. Is there anyone, are we able to, board office staff, make that change and reflect that in the packet? Or does it need to be brought as an amendment from the floor?
This is Barbara McManus. I would think it would be brought forward as an amendment because if you make changes to it, we have to republish by noon tomorrow. And it doesn't sound like that is easily achievable.
It's not easily achievable to add the words aim to, remove 2 brackets and add the number 40 by noon tomorrow.
If that's all the changes that there are, if you're all in agreement that that's what the changes are.
So it's not a consensus, right? There's never 100% consensus.
So this is Tishri. I would just like to add in that it's not our practice to change the packets after they've been published for public transparency, because those who view it maybe yesterday might not view it again until the meeting. So that would not be transparent, and that is not a practice that we do. And the purpose was to bring forward an amendment during the executive committee meeting.
Lynn, you're saying, I couldn't hear you.
I think as long as we publish it 24 hours in advance, we're okay, aren't we? Gosh, I don't know what's happened to my voice. It's going as we speak. I've put out what I think is that we should set the state's goals as our outer perimeter. We should ask the staff to try to achieve an earlier goal. I'm not committing to voting yes on this. I want to see, it doesn't sound like you're putting all of that in there, and it sounds like you're going with 2040. I would like to see us move post haste. My biggest goal, though, is we start now and we get that plan going and we look at, what would it take to be a part of the 2030 and get it all underway. So I'm outvoted on the committee.
Yeah, my concern is, right, there's a real chance that none of us are on the board when this plan is finished.
No, it needs to be before that.
We were just told it's about 18 months, if not longer, to get the plan done. So 18 months might turn into 2 years, and then all of a sudden it's 2024. Some of us are up, others of us aren't. Some people may choose to run, other people may not, and we have no idea what we're going to get tonight for the election. Yeah, Deborah.
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to qualify my statements. When I said 18 months, we're talking about a procurement process. So recognizing that this board still has to consider a budget in which we have money going forward, recognizing where we are, I'm just using that as a time frame. So I just want to be clear on what I stated. It could be 12 months. It's contingent upon the solicitation. Thank you very kindly.
Yeah. I don't want to do this as an amendment from the floor, given the pushback of the minor alterations. I think, Lynn, if I heard you correctly, you were saying binding 2050, aim to get it done earlier. Did I hear you correctly?
It seems to me like the state's deadline is the deadline that all of us have, unless somebody reads that differently. To be all transit, all zero emission fleets, zero emission vehicles throughout the state by 2050. So that seems like the outer edge, yeah. So yes, you heard that correctly, Bobby.
So would you feel more comfortable with shall aim to achieve by 2040 and shall in any case achieve by 2050?
Yeah, if the staff feels like 2040, yes, I would be more comfortable with that. 2040 still seems very soon. But, like I said, my goal is to get us going.
Yeah, Julian?
So just to clarify, sorry if I misheard staff correctly. So the more appropriate manner for this would be bring said language to the executive committee and then have an amendment during the executive committee. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Barbara, you were muted.
I agree with Ty Shrey. That's correct.
That's all I need to clarify. Thank you. So again, it sounds okay.
Okay. Great. I will draft and circulate a proposed amendment, which is just going to be I'll put in italics. Julian, are you able to be at executive committee on Thursday?
I will try my best.
Yeah.
I will try my best.
Lynn, if we are altering the language, are you able to, well, you're on executive committee. Are you going to be at executive committee on Thursday?
Yes.
Okay. Are you comfortable bringing or seconding the motion with the language as amended?
Not yet.
Okay.
We'll look at it and see.
Yeah. And again, there's nothing wrong with policy failing and going down, but I think it's good to try.
The important thing is, if we set I like the aim to achieve, and I think I hear what staff is saying. Let's get going. Let's see what they can do, and but I will certainly consider that. I think 2040 is pretty aggressive, but let's give it a shot, I guess.
Yeah, and I hear it too, and I think that's why we have the caveats built in, and I think it's again, do we want to lead or do we want to be led? And I think I've heard a lot of people say we want to lead, and then when it comes to it, I've heard a lot of we want to be led. So I will circulate the language, and we'll keep things moving. We are adjourned. Sorry, does anyone have anything else? No. Okay, we are adjourned as of 5:09 p.m. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.